Hey, this is Bill DeWeese with Long Strange Journey, and I'm just putting the wraps on a nice little repair project here. Unfortunately, no repair project is nice when you have to spend money, but it is nice to be able to handle it and to accommodate getting the boat back on the water as quickly as possible. So this is my Suzuki DF90 on my Maverick, and about 2 weeks ago I was out scalloping with my wife, and I noticed when I ran the trim up and down that it made a peculiar noise, a little bit different than the usual noise. And I thought, oh, time to check the fluid. Well, I went out this last Sunday with my good friend Eric, and yeah, it told me even more so because the trim pump simply died, the motor. And when I ran the motor, it would click. You could hear the click from either the cowling switch or the binnacle switch, but it would not actually do anything. It grunt and groaned about halfway through the day, but by the end of the day it was stuck in the down position, which is not good. And so what we did while we were there was we took the fuse out, and you could see that you got a PTT fuse. And then you got two spares. One of the spares is the same 10 amp as the PTT fuse, so we swapped that, no help. But most importantly, what you could hear is you could hear the solenoid click, but you couldn't hear the motor running. So we had a bad motor, and actually what I did is we set it into, I got it back up on the ramp safely onto the trailer, and we switched it with help of a friend, a new friend. We got it into the manual mode and brought it up and put it on the service kickstand and got home. And I took the chap off this port side and got to the actual switch, or the connector. I separated it, and then I put a little post in there, and I touched it to the 12 volt. And neither blue wire went up or green wire went down, so we had a bad motor. So what I've done here this week is I've taken out the old motor and I've put in the new motor, and I've kind of captured that process. And so first things first, Suzuki is very, very proud of their PTT motor. It's about a $600 MSRP. I was lucky enough to get it from Precision Marine, which I can get online, but I can go pick up locally here in Largo, which is near me. And so I got it at a pretty good discount for the price, but it's a lot of money. You'll be suffering sticker shock when you see that. Depending upon your Suzuki model, you might be able to find a good alternative. There's one sort of cheap Chinese knockoff, if you will, that might work for this model. It would destroy a $200 bill, so you're almost getting to the point where I would have been out the door at $600 for that and the $4 O-ring that you want to put in there. And so I went with the Suzuki OEM. If this was an offshore boat, and you might argue this, but if this was an offshore boat, I might have done the knockoff version, because you can get 3 motors for the price of the Suzuki motor. And if you're offshore, I mean, you can come home. It's maybe terribly inefficient, but you can make it home with your trim in the stuck down position. This is a skinny water sort of skiff, a Maverick, and I go into places that are incredibly shallow, and sometimes you go from deep to deep via shallow, and you can get stuck. We actually had to watch ourselves on Sunday, and we couldn't fish certain places after it was stuck in the down position, because this becomes a power pole. Even with the trim, the jack plate all the way up, you still can get yourself into a situation where the skeg will touch bottom and you're stuck if you can't trim up. So I really want this to be super reliable, so I went for the Suzuki OEM replacement. So what we're going to do here is I'm going to walk you back through what I had done. This is now with the new unit, running super duper smooth, and I'll show you one thing that you don't want to do that cost me about 30 minutes. So without further ado, let's walk through this process. So as you can see, I've got the motor here, the tap is off on the port side. The motor is up on the service kickstand, so taking the weight off, and we're now going to get to work on this. This is the trim motor that we are replacing in the trim pump assembly. So we're going to get to the point where we take out that motor. So here's some of the tools you'll need for this. You don't need everything, but some of these you'll really benefit from having. A pair of ring pliers for the C-ring that's on the end of the post that crosses through the top of the ram. And then a drift punch. You really don't want to, you might just take a drift punch. This is slightly smaller in diameter than the cross post at the top of the ram, where it goes into the chassis. But you really just want to tap it a few times and loosen it up, and then adjust things as best you can, because your trim pump is dead. But you want to be able to lift this up, put it on the kickstand, wiggle it a little bit. You don't want to be pounding on that. There are some plastic bushings. But once you take the ring off the end of the shaft and you use your drift punch to tap it through, it should come through pretty smoothly, and that will allow you, what that does is allow you to tilt the trim system forward to get to that back sets of screws. One of them is completely blind and one of them is a little challenging, and the other two are pretty easy. And then let me show you what I did here. I think this is common, but some things might not be common. So 10 millimeter is the socket that you're going to need to get the trim pump off. There's 4 different posts, or 4 different fasteners in each corner. And what I've done here is I've taken a piece of 50-pound braid and I've put it through the socket and tied it into a loop before I actually put the socket onto the system here. And what that does is that allows me to fetch this if it falls off, or if it were to stay with the nut, I can pop this off, and it helps retrieve all this, because again, you're in a blind location and you don't want to be back there with your fingers trying to dig this off. So anytime I'm working around a bilge, I tether whatever tool I've got. I've got a front locker up there that's got a hole that goes into a hidden area underneath the deck, and anything gone is like clementine, it's gone forever. So always tether what you're working if you're going to be in a blind location like that. That's what I've done here. I've got a small segment of extension for 1/4 inch for that 10 millimeter, and then I've got a swivel adapter. So what I can do is drop this on there, keep my line up out of the way, and then you can, for loosening and setting things up, starting your screws back in, the nut driver helps a lot, because you'll feel it better and you're not going to cross thread. You can, for that back one, put another adapter on there and use that to break that loose, and you can use it with your 1/4 inch torque wrench to set it back into place when you're done. So I highly recommend building something like this. I've actually just literally taped the line up out of the way and joined it to the socket. So I've got a 1-piece unit here that's got the swivel, and that way I'll never drop that socket back in there. That's almost a must. You can disassemble the entire thing, but once you pop that top ram out of the chassis connection, you can swing it forward. I'll show you that, and you can get in behind there. It gives you like another 1/2 inch of space, which is perfect. So you don't need to disassemble the entire thing. It makes the job really quick. So one of the kind of obvious things here is we're replacing this motor. It has 4 fasteners, and one of them is hard to get to. One of them back here in a corner is near impossible to get to. It's in a blind location. The first thing you at least would like to do is, again, the engine's up on the service kickstand, and so it's secured. And what we are doing is removing this post. This shaft with bushings is up here, and this post goes all the way through that, and there is a half moon or a C-ring here, and so you can just take your ring pliers, and I've already popped that off, and that I've removed that from this side, and then I took a a drift punch that is smaller in diameter, enough to fit easily through the shaft. You could use something even smaller than this, and I just tap that through. There's no corrosion on this, so it's actually quite, there's a little salt water buildup, but not much. And so it just literally tapped right out, and then you can bring this forward a little bit. Now, that will, and many do, that will let you get to this back end. And I've got kind of a concoction here. Is I've got a 10mm socket, and I've got it on an extension, and I've got it on an adjustable swing ratchet here, so that I can get that down in there. Now so in this case, I decided to do it pretty simple. I drop that down onto the thing, and I can now kind of break that loose. And I got my swivel socket in the middle, and I can just bring that right on out. In fact, it's already loose enough here that I can actually do it by hand. Mold removed. Mold removed. Ouch, I hurt my finger. Earl coming out. Come on. There we go. You want to cover and protect that oil. But our motor is now out. There. But that'll protect that until the new motor gets installed. Ooh, there we go. Snug as a bug. Awesome. I've already basically, this is the old motor, and I've taken this out, and I've got the O-ring, and I've got a new O-ring in a new motor, and Suzuki OEM stuff. And so that is what's going to go in right there. Along where the other one was. I'm going to line up my motor with my post, which I have transverse to the way I'm inserting it. I put a little bit of hydraulic oil around the O-ring, and I'm going to drop that back in. And one other thing we can do here, and I will do actually, is I'll pop this back off and get that back nut and put it on, and put my socket assembly on that back nut. And I will simply borrow the old O-ring for a moment, and I'm using that old O-ring around there. You can use a rubber band to hold that into place. So now everything is going to just drop right into place. That should align that screw. Still got my O-ring, yes. And we're going to drop it right in and wiggle it a little bit, and it should fall right there. It goes right into place. Bickety bam, there you are. And so now I can begin the process of tightening that up, and I've got my screw already into place. And I can just make sure I don't cross thread it, be real gentle about it, and I'm good to put that horrible back one in, and I can bring this forward, and then I can push it back in and pin it up when I'm all said and done. So that's my strategy for that. It makes it quite easy task to do this, and I've got a safety chain here if I need to get my socket back off of that nut. All right, so we've got this back together, and all the bolts are put back in, O-ring is in place, check the fluid level. I'll run it up and down a few times. But let me tell you, I can be a real dipstick. So I put this together and it refused to work. The motor worked great, so don't fall for my dumb little trick here. So the motor worked great, which was what was originally dead. So the new motor was in place and it was running, but it would not go up and down and up and down. And the challenge was, it wasn't until I went back to my service manual and just walked through all the parts to figure out what's going on, why would the pump and the motor go bad. It turns out that I had the actual manual release valve open. So dumb on me, because when I went back through the manual, it had all the different things, and it showed that. I'm like, that's the problem. So sure enough, that was 30 minutes of waste of time, double checking things and wondering, racking my brain as why the pump would go bad. So new motor, everything is fat, dumb, and happy. So I just got to button it back up, put the chaps in it, and got some cleanup to do while I got the chaps out, because there's a couple things here that I want to address.